The city doesn't just exist. It breathes, it shifts, it consumes. Beneath the neon lights and towering skyscrapers, deals are made, hearts are broken, and people disappear. Stan understood this world, not just the surface, the undercurrent. He knew power wasn't taken, just borrowed. Control, that was his thing. That was the one thing he had mastered. Until now. This morning Stan woke up to something wrong. Not just an empty bed, a silence that felt placed, a vacuum, thick, deliberate. Something was missing, not just absent, erased. The moment you realize the brakes won't save you, then his eyes caught it. A glint in the dim light. A ring. Not just a piece of jewelry, a symbol, a promise, a relic of something already dead. It wasn't left behind. It wasn't forgotten in a rush of emotion. It had been placed, a message, a final act sharper than words could ever be. This was precision, a carefully orchestrated exit, down to the last deliberate touch. He didn't pick it up. He didn't have to. The weight of it had already settled inside him, heavier than gold, colder than steel. Outside, the city moved. People walked, horns blared, conversations blurred into morning traffic. Inside, Stan's world had stopped. The silence wasn't just silence anymore, it was wrong. He reached for his phone. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. His stomach twisted, his pulse steady, but his hands ice cold. She wasn't just gone, she had walked away. And for the first time that morning, Stan felt the cut of certainty, a blade pressing against his ribs. This wasn't an accident. Stan hung up before the voicemail finished. His thumb hovered over the call button. Don't overreact, don't assume. He dialed. First call, no answer. Second call, nothing. Third, silence. The breath he took was sharp, forced. Keep it together. Control, that's what you're built on. Then why were his hands like ice? He dialed Sarah. The line rang. Then, hey, what's up? Light, unbothered. Stan's voice was steady. Too steady. Have you seen Emily? A pause. No. I haven't seen her since last night. His jaw locked. Last night? You mean she didn't come home? Another hesitation. No, she said she was staying with you. I figured you two were having a good time. The weight in his stomach settled into something sharp. Sarah, this isn't funny. Did she say anything about going somewhere? Another pause, longer this time. No, she didn't say anything. Then, softer. But maybe you should check her phone. She might have left you something. Stan didn't reply, because he was already moving. Back in the bedroom, Emily's phone sat exactly where she had left it. Untouched, waiting. She hadn't even taken it with her. The screen lit up, swallowing the room in artificial light. Missed calls, unread messages, fragments of a life that no longer included him. And then, one text, from an unknown number. Stan's thumb hovered for a fraction of a second before he tapped it. Almost time, my love. You'll look perfect standing there. No second thoughts now. The words weren't just words. They were a scalpel slicing through denial, carving out the illusion he had clung to like a lifeline. Oh, plan. A future that had never included him. He was never the destination, just the detour. His breath hitched, a jagged inhale. His pulse stayed steady, but something inside him cracked, thin and splintering. This wasn't abandonment. This wasn't even betrayal. It was erasure. Something cold and venomous spread through him. Not the kind of anger that flares and fades, the kind that builds, the kind that smolders beneath the surface, quiet and lethal, waiting for the right moment to burn. The hallway narrowed, the walls pressed in, and then laughter. Light, unburdened, a sound that should have meant nothing. But it did. It drifted through the thin walls, carefree, effortless, slipping past him like he wasn't even real. Stan inhaled sharply, his ribs tightening around something raw and unspoken. Not just absence, replacement. The sound was hers. Emily's, easy, careless, a laugh he had once known, better than his own. But now it belonged to someone else. His jaw clenched. When was the last time she had laughed like that with him? He couldn't remember, but he remembered other things. 3 months ago, her at dinner, more focused on her phone than on him. Last week had lying in bed beside her, listening to her breathe, realizing it no longer matched his. The signs had been there, he just hadn't wanted to see them. And now they had led him here. A slow inhale, steady hands, measured steps. Something deep in his chest tightened, an instinct curling like a warning. Every part of him screamed, turn back, walk away, let it go. But the human mind is cruel. It doesn't protect, it preys. It loops, obsesses, demands answers. And the heart? It doesn't mourn what it doesn't know. It mourns what it cannot unknow. Stan had already fallen the moment he woke up, alone. Now there was only the impact. His fingers hovered over the doorknob, sweat slicking his palm. A pause. A breath. A moment where he could still turn back. Then he pressed down. The latch clicked, the door cracked open, an inch, then 2. And inside the world fractured. Her fingers skated absently over his chest, a touch so effortless it burned. The man beside her, relaxed, smug, lay with the kind of satisfaction that came only from knowing he had already won. The sight sent something jagged through Stan's chest, slicing through air, through reason, through restraint. The door swung open in slow motion. A heartbeat stretched into eternity. His gaze found her, not just her body sprawled across the sheets, but the ease of it, the belonging, the way she tucked her legs under the sheets, twisting slightly as she reached for the man beside her. A gesture so familiar it made him sick. The seamless way she folded into the space beside him, like it had been shaped for her all along. Her fingers traced lazy, familiar patterns over the stranger's chest, patterns Stan had once thought were his alone. His stomach clenched. Not in rage. Not yet. First came the dissonance, the moment the mind refuses to accept what the eyes see. Stan stood there, unnoticed, invisible, like he had already been erased. His pulse slammed against his ribs. For a second, just a second, he wasn't in that room anymore. He was back in their apartment, watching her curl up in one of his old shirts, laughing at a joke he couldn't even remember now. Watching her twirl her fork absently at dinner, nodding at his words, but not really listening. Standing in their doorway last week, watching her pack a bag, telling him it was just for work. A life, a love, a lie. Stan stopped breathing. For a moment, the world was sucked into a vacuum, soundless, weightless. Then it all slammed back at once. The heat, the pressure behind his eyes, the roaring pulse in his ears. He wasn't just looking at Emily. He was someone else now. Someone unrecognizable. Someone who had already been erased. Then Emily turned. Their eyes met. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, shock, calculation. Her lips parted, but no sound came. And that was the worst part. Not the betrayal, not the stranger's hand still resting on her skin. It was the realization, the way she hesitated, not out of guilt, not out of shame, but out of something colder. Survival. Like a deer assessing whether to bolt, already too late. And in that moment, something inside Stan snapped so quietly, he almost didn't hear it. Their laughter faded into startled gasps. Emily sat up, her eyes wide, her breath catching in her throat. "Stand!" she screamed. The man, tall, built, careless, shoved himself upright, expression shifting from surprise to irritation. "What the hell are you doing here?" The world around Stan narrowed to this single moment. The room, the betrayal, the knife's edge of his own heartbeat. Anger flooded his veins. Raw, red-hot, all-consuming. You think you can take her from me? A blade in his hand. He didn't remember pulling it out. Didn't remember deciding. Only the feeling, the resistance of flesh as the knife sank in. The stranger choked on a breath, a jagged, wet gasp as his body recoiled. His hands clamped over the wound, fingers trembling as if sheer will could reverse what had already been done. His gaze locked onto Stan's. A flicker of shock, then terror, and then slow, dawning agony. But Stan wasn't finished. He turned to Emily. She shrank into the headboard, chest heaving, fingers clawing at the sheets as if they could somehow anchor her to safety. "You betrayed me," Stan whispered. Then louder, "You made me a fool!" The knife glinted in the dim light as he stepped toward her. "Please, stop!" Emily sobbed, pressing herself against the headboard. "You don't have to do this." "Talk?" Stan let out a hollow laugh. "What's left to talk about?" For a moment, a split second, something flickered inside him. Doubt, regret. She was still Emily. Still the woman he had loved. But then she moved. Not toward him, not away. Toward the man bleeding on the floor. And that was all it took. Stan sat motionless, staring at the dried blood on his hands. A couple drifted past the alley, their laughter sharp, indifferent. They didn't look his way. They never did. How could the world still be normal when his had collapsed? Stan turned, eyes darting down the narrow passage. A rusted fire escape, a dumpster overflowing with rotting garbage. No way out. The footsteps were closer now. A voice. "The police! We know you're back there, hands where we can see them." Stan's pulse spiked. "Move!" He bolted, instincts overriding thought, shoving past the dumpster as his feet hammered against the wet pavement. The alley stretched ahead, narrowing, closing in. No escape, not really. But he ran anyway. A beam of light cut through the darkness, catching his back. Too late. A shot rang out. Pain exploded in his shoulder, white-hot and searing. His body twisted violently, momentum ripping him off balance. The ground slammed into him. Hard, unforgiving. His breath hitched, pain splintering through him like fire. His limbs felt heavy, the world tilting sideways as blood soaked his shirt. This was it. The end. Hands grabbed at him, the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists, biting into his skin. A knee pressed into his spine, pinning him down. He didn't fight, didn't struggle, didn't speak. What was there left to say? The room was sterile, small, a single table, 2 chairs, a flickering fluorescent light overhead. Emily's blood. It had darkened, cracked against his skin. He should have washed it off. But what was the point? The door creaked open. A woman stepped inside. Dark suit, hair pulled into a severe ponytail. Detective Sarah Martinez? She set a folder down on the table, sat across from him, hands folded neatly. Silence stretched. Then, her voice was calm, too calm. Stan let out a breath. Slow, unsteady. She was everything. Martinez tilted her head. And now she's gone? The words hit like a sledgehammer. Gone. Not just gone, dead. He swallowed hard, the memory of Emily's face flashing through his mind, her wide, shocked eyes, lips parting in that last silent question. Why? He blinked, his jaw clenched. I loved her. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Martinez leaned forward, tapping a manicured nail against the folder. No, Stan. Her tone sharpened. You killed her. His hands curled into fists. She flipped the folder open. A photograph? Emily, lying on the bed, eyes vacant, body still. The sight of her, motionless, lifeless, hit harder than the bullet in his shoulder. Stan's breath hitched. He looked away. Stan sat at the defendant's table, wrists bound by cold steel cuffs. The suit was a second skin, felt foreign now, a relic from another life, another man. The prosecutor's voice sliced through the courtroom, sharp and deliberate. This was not a crime of passion. This was a man who believed he had the right to control, and when that control slipped, he chose violence. Stan barely registered the words. The judge turned to the jury, expression unreadable. "We find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder." The words landed not like a blow, but like a burial. Dirt hitting the lid of a coffin. Cold, final, sealing him into a fate that had been decided long before today. The gavel slammed down. Stan exhaled once. Slow. Final. The courtroom buzzed, whispers, movement, the turning of pages. But he heard only the silence pressing in, thick and suffocating. Then, Detective Sarah Martinez leaned in slightly, just enough for only him to hear. She never screamed your name. Stan's breath stalled, his fingers twitched in the cuffs. "Not once," she added, tapping the folder, "even when she saw the knife." Something inside him caved, crumbling inward. Stan didn't flinch when they took him away. He had already been sentenced. The cell was small, cold. The past months had blurred. Courtrooms, verdicts, cameras flashing in his face. His name whispered like a cautionary tale. But now there was nothing. Not silence, not sound. Just the weight of a moment stretched too long, collapsing inward like a dying star. His fingers traced the edge of the scratchy blanket. Had Emily felt this, lying there, realizing she was about to die? Did she think of him? Of what they used to be? Did she wish she had never left? A sharp breath pushed through his nose. It didn't matter now. Outside, the world continued. People fell in love, people betrayed each other, people moved on. The city kept breathing. But in here, time had no direction, no past, no future. Only a slow, endless folding of regret over itself, like waves erasing footprints from the shore. The moment he opened that door, he had ceased to exist. What was left of him was just a story, a cautionary tale, a name spoken in whispers. Behind him, a guard knocked once on the iron bars. Stan. He turned. The guard smirked slightly, shaking his head. "Wrong name." Stan blinked, and that was it. Even his name wasn't his anymore. The air in his cell carried the weight of ghosts, the ones he had created, the ones he could never outrun. The gavel had fallen, the sentence had been spoken, but his punishment had started long before that. When she left, when he let himself become this, when he let the darkness in and never tried to close the door, the world moved forward. It always did. But here, time was a loop. A moment stretched into eternity, curling in on itself like smoke from a dying flame. The silence was deafening. A verdict long decided, pressing against his ribs, sinking into his bones like a parasite. The world outside pulsed, uncaring, swallowing the past without hesitation. The city exhaled, the streets carried on. And Stan, he wasn't even a shadow anymore, just a name slipping through time, a cautionary tale destined to be forgotten by next winter. Stan's stomach lurched. He had seen her lifeless before, but never like this. The prosecutor pressed on. "Didn't just kill her, he made sure she felt it." Stan's jaw locked. He wanted to speak, to argue, to deny. But what could he say? That he hadn't meant to? That he had loved her? That it hadn't felt real until now? He swallowed hard, staring at the table. Across the room, Detective Sarah Martinez studied him. Not with anger, not with disgust, with curiosity, like she was still deciding if he felt anything at all. The jury filed in. The air in the courtroom thickened. "We find the defendant, Stan, guilty of second-degree murder." The words struck like a gavel to the chest. The world tilted. The cell was small, cold. Stan sat on the cot, back against the cement, staring at nothing. The past months blurred. Courtrooms, verdicts, flashing cameras. His name whispered like a warning. But now there was nothing. Not silence, not sound. Just the crushing weight of time, stretching endlessly, collapsing inward like a dying star. His fingers traced the edge of the thin, scratchy blanket. Had Emily felt this the moment she knew? Did she think of him? Of what they had been? Did she regret leaving? He exhaled sharply. It didn't matter. Beyond these walls, life continued. People fell in love, people betrayed each other, people moved on. The city still breathed. But in here, time had no past, no future. Just a loop, a relentless echo of what could never be undone. The moment he opened that door, Stan ceased to exist. What remained was a story, twisted, broken, a cautionary tale that would soon be forgotten. He thought the gavel was the final sound. He was wrong. The real punishment wasn't the gavel, it was the silence. If dark, gripping crime stories pull you in, don't just watch, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because some stories only get darker.